This is New Zealand, one of the most beautiful countries on Earth. It has mountains that look fake, lakes that look edited, and scenery so perfect it feels like a movie set. And yet something strange is happening. People are leaving New Zealand. Not tourists, but actual New Zealanders. The people who grew up here. The people who are supposed to be living inside the dream. They are packing up their lives and moving away, mostly to Australia. And it is happening at a rate that is shocking for a rich, stable, first world country. Because this is not a country collapsing from war. It is not a dictatorship, and it is not a failed state. This is a place with clean streets, good schools, stable government, and high quality of life. But still, the people are leaving in numbers. So the question is simple. How does a country that looks like paradise become a place people escape from? To answer that, we have to understand something most people miss about New Zealand, and that is its geography. New Zealand is one of the most geographically isolated countries on Earth. It sits in the South Pacific, thousands of kilometers away from major global population centers. If you live in Europe, the Middle East, or the Americas, New Zealand is so far away that it does not even feel like a real place. It feels like a bonus map in a video game. And this remoteness is exactly why New Zealand feels so special. It is calm, quiet, and feels protected. It feels like the world's chaos cannot reach it. But here is the problem. That same distance also makes it extremely hard to build a large modern economy. New Zealand has a population of about 5.3 million people. To put that in perspective, Sydney alone has about the same population. So New Zealand is basically an entire country with the population of one city. That matters because modern economies depend on scale. A bigger population means a bigger workforce, bigger consumer markets, more specialized industries, and more opportunities. A smaller population means fewer companies, fewer jobs, fewer industries, and fewer career ladders. And then you add the second problem. New Zealand is not just small, it is far away from the global supply chains. Most global trade moves through dense shipping lanes in the Northern Hemisphere. Asia, Europe, and North America dominate global production and consumption. New Zealand is far from all of it. That means many industries that could exist in New Zealand simply do not, because they are cheaper and easier to run somewhere else. This is why New Zealand's economy became unusual. It did not become a country of massive manufacturing or giant global corporations. Instead, it became a country where the main engines of wealth are very specific. And that brings us to the most important point. If you look closely, New Zealand's economy is built around two major pillars. The first is agriculture, and the second is housing. And one of these is incredibly productive, but does not employ many people. The other employs a lot of people, but creates a dangerous trap. Let's start with agriculture. New Zealand is one of the most agriculturally productive countries in the world. This is rare for a developed country. Most rich countries eventually shift into finance, technology, services, and high-end manufacturing. New Zealand did too, but it never fully escaped farming because its land is extremely fertile. Its climate is good, it has abundant water, and it has a massive advantage that people forget. New Zealand is in the Southern Hemisphere. That means it can produce off-season food for the Northern Hemisphere. When Europe is in winter, New Zealand can still grow. When North America cannot harvest, New Zealand can. So New Zealand exports dairy, meat, fruits, and high-value agricultural products into global markets, especially into Asia, which is nearby, huge, and always hungry. This sounds like a great deal, and it is, but here is the catch. Most educated young people are not going to build their careers in agriculture, and even if they wanted to, there are not enough jobs. Because modern farming in New Zealand is highly mechanized, the farms are so valuable per hectare that farmers invest in top-level equipment like automation, machinery, and systems, which means fewer workers. So yes, agriculture is a major export engine, but it is not a career engine for the average young professional. So what does that leave? This is where the second pillar becomes important, and that is housing. In New Zealand, housing is not just something people live in. Housing is the economy. Selling houses, buying houses, building houses, renting houses, financing houses, managing houses, and regulating houses. A massive part of New Zealand's economic activity revolves around real estate. And when a country becomes dependent on housing for growth, something always happens. Housing stops being a home and starts being a financial instrument. That is where the nightmare begins. Because once housing becomes an investment vehicle, prices stop reflecting local salaries. They start reflecting global capital. There is a belief that prices will always go up. This is why New Zealand, despite being sparsely populated, has some of the most unaffordable real estate in the world, which sounds insane. Because when people imagine New Zealand, they imagine endless land and open space. So why is housing expensive? Because land is not the only thing that matters. Location, infrastructure, and construction costs matters. And New Zealand has some of the highest building costs in the developed world. Materials are expensive because they must be imported. Labour is expensive because the workforce is small. And regulation is heavy because building in a small country is easier to control. So even if the land exists, houses are still expensive. And this becomes the first major pressure on young New Zealanders. They look at home ownership and realise it is not a goal anymore. It is a fantasy. But here is the part that surprises people. If housing is expensive, why do Kiwis go to Australia? Australia is also expensive. Sydney and Melbourne are brutal. So why do they leave? The answer is not housing. The answer is opportunity. New Zealand is a small economy, and small economies have a brutal reality. They do not have enough high-end jobs. If you want to work in a specialised field, the number of companies that can employ you is limited. If you want to climb corporate ladders, there are fewer ladders. If you want to work in big tech, there is no Silicon Valley in Auckland. If you want to work in global finance, Auckland is not Singapore. If you want to work in high-end research, the budgets are smaller. If you want to build a career with global exposure, you will hit a ceiling faster. This is the hidden problem. New Zealand is a beautiful country to live in, but it is not a powerful country to build in. And this is exactly why young Kiwis leave. They do not leave because they hate New Zealand. They leave because they want to achieve more. They want to be more skilled, more paid, more competitive, and more connected. And Australia is sitting right there, just across the Tasman Sea. If you are a small country, your neighbour matters. For New Zealand, the neighbour is Australia. And Australia is not just nearby, it is culturally similar. It speaks the same language, similar lifestyle, and same sports culture. But the biggest difference is that Australia is bigger, and it has more companies, more industries, more capital, more universities, more career paths, and more money. This is why New Zealand experiences something that most rich countries do not. A first world brain drain. Usually brain drain happens from poor countries to rich countries, from unstable places to stable places, from war zones to peaceful places. But New Zealand is already stable and rich, and still the talent leaves, because Australia is simply a bigger version of the same world. It has the same vibe, but with more opportunity. And here is what makes it worse. The legal relationship between the two countries makes it extremely easy. New Zealanders can live and work in Australia with very few restrictions. They do not need to learn a new language. They do not need to adapt culturally. They do not face the same barriers that migrants from Asia, Africa, or Europe face. They can just go and live there, which means New Zealand is in a unique situation. It is a small country that is connected to a bigger country in a way that makes leaving almost frictionless. And when leaving becomes frictionless, people leave, especially young and ambitious people. And that is exactly what is happening. The people leaving are not retirees. They are not the unemployed. They are not the people with nothing to lose. They are usually the opposite. They are young professionals, people in their 20s and early 30s, people who just got educated, people who are highly productive, people who should be building New Zealand's future. And when a country loses those people, the damage is not immediate. It is delayed, but it compounds because young, skilled workers are the ones who start businesses. They become doctors, they become engineers, they become senior managers, they become the tax base, they become the future parents, they become the next generation's mentors. So when they leave, New Zealand does not just lose people, it loses momentum, and then the country has to fill the gap. So what does it do? It increases immigration, which is a logical move, but it creates a new problem. New Zealand's population is still growing, but much of that growth comes from immigration. New arrivals come in to fill labour shortages, to keep the economy running and support an ageing population. This is normal. But New Zealand's situation becomes strange because of one thing. Many immigrants also leave to Australia, because once someone becomes established in New Zealand, it becomes easier to move. New Zealand becomes a stepping stone. So New Zealand has a pipeline like this. 1. New Zealand loses skilled locals to Australia. 2. New Zealand imports skilled migrants to fill the gaps. 3. Those migrants gain residency, experience, and stability. 4. And then they also leave for Australia, which means New Zealand is doing the hard work of attracting people and Australia is doing the easy work of absorbing them. And this becomes extremely hard to stop because New Zealand cannot compete with Australia on scale, and it cannot compete with Australia on salaries, especially in industries like medicine, engineering, finance, and corporate management. At the same time, another flow is happening. Australians are moving to New Zealand, but not the same kind. They are not young workers. They are not early career professionals. They are often older, wealthier, retirees, or high-income individuals who want lifestyle. Queenstown, Wanaka, or Auckland's nicer suburbs. Places with views that feel like a postcard. These Australians are not moving to build New Zealand's workforce. They are moving to enjoy New Zealand. And in many cases, they are buying property, sometimes as holiday homes, sometimes as retirement homes, sometimes as investments. And because Australians tend to have higher average wealth, they add pressure to New Zealand Zealand's housing market. Even if they are not the majority of buyers, they become a visible symbol of the problem. Locals feel priced out. They feel like their own country is being bought as a lifestyle product, and that creates resentment. But the deeper issue remains the same. New Zealand has become a country where the most talented people leave and the wealthiest outsiders arrive. That is the exact opposite of what you want. So why has New Zealand struggled to fix this? At first glance, the solution sounds simple. Make the country more attractive for young people, increase salaries, lower housing costs, build more industries, and create more high-end jobs. But in reality, this is extremely difficult, because New Zealand cannot just magically become a big economy. It cannot change its location. It cannot suddenly create a massive domestic market. And it cannot easily compete with Australia, because Australia is not just bigger. Australia is also a global resource powerhouse. It exports iron ore, coal, and gas. It has deep capital markets, a strong currency, and enormous foreign investment. So Australia has more money circulating through the system, which means more jobs, higher salaries, which means more opportunity. New Zealand cannot easily replicate that, so the country is stuck in a difficult position. If it raises wages, costs go up. If costs go up, housing becomes even more expensive. If housing becomes more expensive, more young people leave, and the cycle continues. So here is the brutal truth about New Zealand. It is one of the best countries in the world to live in if you already have money, if you already have a career, if you already own property, and if you are already established. But if you are young and trying to build your life, it can feel like the walls are closing in, because the economy is narrow, the housing market is heavy, the salaries are lower compared to Australia, and the escape route is sitting right there. A 3-hour flight away, with higher pay, more jobs, and more scale. So Kiwis do what humans always do. They go where the opportunity is. And here's why this trend is so hard to reverse. The most difficult part is that leaving does not feel like a betrayal. It feels like a normal life choice. New Zealanders do not feel like immigrants in Australia. They feel like cousins. They fit in. They are welcomed. They blend in instantly. So the emotional barrier to leaving is low. And when emotional barriers are low, economic incentives win. This is why the trend continues. So what happens next? New Zealand is not doomed. It is not collapsing. It is not becoming a failed state. But it is facing a slow, quiet problem that can hollow out a country over time. A country can survive losing people, but it cannot thrive if it keeps losing its most ambitious generation, because eventually the country becomes something else. Not a place where young people build, but a place where older people retire. A place where property becomes the main game. A place where the economy becomes a loop. And if that happens, New Zealand becomes what some people already fear: a beautiful museum, a perfect postcard, a luxury waiting room, a country that looks like a dream, but functions like an expensive retirement village.